There's the transfer case all put back together. I got probably just a touch too much of that sealer. But that's what you want it to do, is squirt out evenly everywhere. And the stuff on the inside will stay there if you use the right sealer. You know, like that black silicone was used on this before. That stuff just falls apart eventually. And this stuff held up, you know, 200,000 miles inside the motor, inside that block. It was just like that, brand new. And it doesn't want to disintegrate, doesn't want to fall apart, doesn't want to leave the spot that it's at. Yeah, because like where the oil pump pickup tube is, you know, you had to clean out little black chunks of silicone. Anyway, that's done. And it's time to clean everything up real good. Time to assemble that short block. Tired of messing around. It's time to get it done. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is put the cam in there. I took it out by flipping the block up on the end and then just pulling it out vertical. That'd be an easy way to put it in, but I don't want to screw around flipping that nice clean block up on end. So instead of having the crank in there, I'll just leave this part open. This part will be open. I can reach in there, feed it through, nice and easy. And I've spent the last 15-20 minutes looking at this thing hard, make sure it's all good. And I'm going to clean it off really well with the brake cleaner, and then lube it up properly. And lube up the bearings in here properly. Slide that thing in. One thing about this, it's what they call a dual mass gear on this thing. And so this thing moves in two different spots. And it's kind of spring loaded and has some tension. But there's a hole here, and then there's a hole over here. And what you got to do is get those two together, put a pin in there, and then when you install it against the gear of the crank, those two will be lined up and that thing will be under a certain amount of tension. And what it does, I would imagine, is just kind of take out the backlash and like the vibration, the chatter of the valve train, you know, when the engine's kind of at an idle state. Anyway, I gotta figure out a way. I'll use a couple little pry bars or something and get that under tension, put a pin in there, a little bolt, get that ready, clean it off, and get it lubed up, put it in there. And I will not mount it with these two bolts. I won't mount it yet until I get the crank in there, make sure the timing marks are just right. Make sure I'm happy with the crank, make sure I'm happy with the cam, and then we'll put them bolts in there. Okay, here we go. Went through a bunch of brake cleaner. And blowing it off many times, trying to get all the lint, and you can inspect it pretty well and notice that there really isn't much lint, and I want none. I definitely want no hair. And then I've blown this block off 20 times. Trying to keep it all clean and get everything out of there, so every time you turn around, a little piece of something blows on there. So I'm not wearing my coat, got my sleeves rolled up, trying to walk slow. When I pick things up, and I don't carry it over the top of my stuff. You know, I blew out the area prior. So just doing many things, trying to keep this part of it down. Now on this tensioned pulley down here, I was able to stick a screwdriver in that hole, and pry on that pulley enough, 3/4 of the way, to where then I was able to stick a screwdriver in those gears and get them lined up. And then there's a little bolt you stick in that hole right there. It's a threaded bolt, goes in there, and those gears are lined up close enough to get it in there. And then once it's mounted, you take that bolt out of there, and then the tension remains on the other part of the crank pulley. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that's it sounds like a box of rocks chattering when you get kind of a loose gearbox. So I'm pretty sure that's probably what that's doing, is kind of taking up some of the slack of the drive train, or valve train. So these are uneducated guesses on everything I talk about. So I'm going to get this all lubed up. Use a combo oil and assembly lube. The assembly lube I'm going to use, this kind of hangs around a little bit better. Less clearances in the bearings, so I'm just going to use regular motor oil. Watched a lot of videos, advice on, you know, different advice on whether to use assembly lube or just regular oil. And, you know, one guy said that, you know, brand new cars, they're put together with this oil. So it's kind of a matter of how long the motor's going to sit before you run it. On one guy's opinion, that makes sense to me. So this one's getting a combo. Okay, I'm getting all the main caps cleaned up, wiped down real well with brake cleaner. Did the same thing on the block. And if we look close, we better not see, you know, any stuff. Should be clean. Now, on this number 5, which is the back, this is the one that has the clearances cut out for the thrust bearings. And on this particular motor, this particular crank, it has these inserts which go in here. There's the old ones right here, and I marked them. There's one that goes on the cap side and 2 that goes on the block side. And those weren't wore out. Nothing was wrong with those. So I don't expect any trouble with the end plate on the crank. But that's where those go. Now, part of all that working and lining up properly depends on these little sleeves. And they line up these little dowels. Line this one up so it's just perfect. Perfect. And this one's been pushed in here all the way. So anyways, I caught that. I'm going to pull that out. Drop it in here like this one is. And on this side, where it's designed to be inserted and assembled, it can't go down in there far enough where it's lost. So it has no choice but to be lined up. Compared to this one, there could be a mistake made there. That one push all the way down in there, off just a little bit. Then, you know, you're going to have uneven clearances on one side or the other on your thrust. So, man, I just hate this engine building crap. All the little things that could just ruin the whole thing. So it's kind of stressful, kind of annoying. So glad I saw that and not in a hurry, taking my time, doing everything little by little. Anyways, I thought I wanted to point that out. Instead of one thing getting caught on, there's one thing that I caught. So, voila. So there's the new bearings, and they look pretty good. All nice and even. Surface, edges, all just so. Same thing on the back. It's got to be just right, and it's got to be clean, perfect. So this side over here I got installed, and I've already wiped that out with brake cleaner. And you know, it's a better set of bearings. You can tell they were all made of a set. All the coating, it's all got the same markings on the coating where it was applied and then dried. All nice and even, all the same. Compared to that other set, you know, there was a couple spots where they were trying to fix stuff. You know, they tried, something went wrong here, and they tried to fix it, and you could just tell. So whatever. It may have been fine, but at least I can sleep at night and I feel better about it. Here's the thrust bearings. These little notches here go against the crank. Oil gets in there. Compared to this side, which lays flat against the block. So each one of those has a side with grooves on it. This is all clean. Shouldn't be any debris, any dust on there, because I've blown it off quite a few times, wiped it down, checked it out. You know, down inside there, it's all clean. Everywhere, clean. That's a diesel. That's a diesel. You know, because they're hard to clean. I had one shop turn me down. They didn't even want to work on it. He said they're too dirty. And in some ways, yeah, I guess they're right. They're pretty damn dirty. But when I do that EGR delete on this thing, it's going to be clean inside all the time. Clean oil changes. Alright, been over that thing 4 or 5 times trying to make sure it's clean. Been over this 4 or 5 times more. Trying to make sure it's clean. And I think I got it ready to go. There's the one of the rust washers. Keeps the crank from moving forward and aft, back and forth. And then here's the one on the other side. Those grooves will go toward the crank, so it stays lubed as it spins. So after I check this one more time, put some oil on there, drop the crank in, line up the marks. Those 2 little marks. That one goes in between them. All the holes are clean, threads are all clean. Surface what mates up with the cap is all clean. So yeah, pretty much ready to roll. Drop that on there. The crank dropped in there, everything went good. I'm gonna put the caps on there. But it spins fine. Got my marks lined up. Got it in there. All torqued down. 3 different stages. The last one, angle 30 degrees. I put a line on top here. And it's kind of a guess, 30 degrees, a little more than half of 45 degrees. So, you know, 45 here, half of that's there. So, it's kind of where I brought those two. And it all goes good. See, it's the crank and the cam turning together. So it's fairly easy to turn just with one hand. Feels pretty good. All torqued down, got the side bolts in there with the sealer on them. Those got down to like 57 foot-pounds. These were, you know, like 50, then like 97, and then 30 degrees. And I got these bolts in here, so the cam is secured in there now. And you can see how these teeth are lined up because they're up against this gear. And then at that point, once you get all that bolted down, you can remove that bolt right there. At least if I were you, I would get that thing out of there because it don't belong. And now I think I'm going to take a little break. And the next thing is I got to put the pistons together and get those ready to put in. Well, new day today. Got the cam and the crank in there. And I'm thinking I want to go ahead and put the back plate on it. Which, that's what this is. And it seals up to the back of the motor. Oil's in here. Oil is in this part. And the oil pan seals to this. And then you got your oil seal for the crank, and I got my new seal right here. It's like a 2-part seal. This part gets kind of pressed onto the crank, and then this part here gets pressed into this back plate. And it kind of seals that way. And you have to, you know, I'd imagine you're supposed to buy a special tool. In fact, I know you're supposed to drive that in there because it's big. The crank's in the middle. And it's hard to get that in there even without messing it up, and to press this outside ring and the inside ring on there at the same time. I got the old one off of the crank, and I'm going to use this as a part of my tool, because it hits both surfaces. It hits this one and that outer one together. And I'm only going to assume that when that thing's in properly, that those two pieces are flush. You know, and that way it's got the proper tension pushing up against this thing to seal it. You can feel some pressure. It wants to be down just a little bit. Anyway, that's just kind of how things work, I'm sure. That's what we're going to be doing. And this has to be sealed. O-rings go here. We use that gray silicone sealer on this part. Can't line up dowels. I'll get my bolts ready. Get everything ready before I put it on there, of course. So I figured I'd better check the end play. And it's, see if I can get this right here. Just kind of put some tension. Put some tension one way, zeroed it out, and then go back the other way, and I've smacked it with the dead blow a couple times back and forth. And we got 3/1000. Okay, so goes back to 2 when I let the pressure off. And that's well within spec, because it's like 0.18. And on the long side is 0.8 or 0.008. So anyway, we're good on that, nice and tight. Progress. Got the back cover on, got the seal on there. Made real special care that it's even. You know, measured even all the way around on there, so it won't wobble as it's turning. And I made sure that that inside is the same depth, you know, as the outside part. And just about the perfect amount of squish. This time. It's just perfect. Perfect amount, even amounts coming out everywhere. I didn't need to seal, but I put some there. Just a little bit squirting out. And then I go ahead and put it on the stand. And every time I do something to it, I make sure that it doesn't affect how this thing turns. Or if it does, you know, it makes sense. As I add something and it adds drag, in other words, now you can hear a little bit of drag from that seal, which it should. Piece of hair. Piece of hair, dang it. Doing a pretty good job of keeping this thing clean. I'm looking at the pins right now, and they're staying pretty dust free. Okay, good. Now, next thing I gotta do is break out all the connecting rods, pistons, wrist pins, rings, check the end gaps in the rings, and line everything up on my bench over here. And get ready to do that. One thing I don't want to forget is to put these squirters back in here, squirting the bottom of the pistons, which I won't. I got a list. As I took it apart, I wrote things down. So I'm just kind of backwards in engineering. Pretty detailed stuff, you know, as far as what I took apart. Make sure I won't miss anything. And so far so good. So here's all the pistons, connecting rods, wrist pins. Here's the clips for the pins, all the rings, new bolts for the rods, and there's something else missing. Oh, the bearings for the rod bearings. Gotta pull those out and inspect those. And checked out the cylinders. Of course they all look good, but there was a tiny bit of surface rust that was starting to build up on a couple of them where they'd been grabbed. Anytime you touch clean metal, the oil from the skin wants to draw moisture away quicker than just the bare metal itself, and it'll start rusting. So I should have watched that earlier, but I took a scuff pad and some WD and went over all those. That leopard striping that you see on there, that is evidently a hardening process they do on these things. The upper part of the cylinder wall, it's got some kind of hardening to the metal, and it leaves that leopard striping on these Duramax blocks. And the machinist went over this deck just the tiniest little bit. To clean it up without taking anything off. I don't know if I showed this on a video, but look, just a perfect amount of stuff squished out of here. So now this next stage is a big stage. There's a lot going on here. I got to put the rings on the pistons. I got to check the rings in the bore, check the gap, put the rings on the pistons, install the connecting rod with the pin and the clips, make sure everything's clean, put the bearings in the caps and the rods, and then get ready to install the assembled piston and connecting rod into the block. And everything's got to go a certain way. The pistons have to go in a certain way. You know, one of these is smaller than over here for the exhaust and intake. An arrow pointing up A lot of times there's an arrow pointing forward, but it's kind of a symmetrical situation. I know one thing for sure is you got these squirter holes that have to sit in a certain spot on the block for the squirters to squirt in there. And the valves have to match up with what the head's doing. So you got on one side you got the small valves, on the other side you got the big valves. You can tell right there that's smaller, that's bigger. And if I was to measure it, you'd see just a little bit of difference. And the heads are symmetrical, so you know this head would fit on the other side, and vice versa. And the connecting rods have to be in there a certain way. Of course, they're all numbered. There's 5, 6, 7, 8. The surface versus that surface, you know, these are meant to be together. Like so. So yeah, like I say, a lot going on. A lot has to be just perfect. A lot of tolerances have to be met. So far, so good. So I've been doing some checking, some measuring. I got the rings in here. Checking the gap. And I think I got some issues. This is number 2 right here. You can look, that's a little tighter, that's a little tighter. That's about the same. These are kind of all the same pretty much. You can visually maybe see it. And then you go over to this side. Quite a bit wider, with this one being the widest. It's pretty obvious just visually looking at it. This one here is a little more narrow. Now when I measure the cylinders as well as the gap, the cylinder bore corresponds with the gap I get. In other words, I got a pretty consistent bore on 2, 4, 6, and 8. Which I measure it. It's about 4.072. Pretty even. What I get with my simple little tool here. Now the other side, I got some variants. I got 073, 073, 075, and 074, which corresponds with larger gaps on this side. This one being the largest one on 135. Now, so on 5 I get a 4075 measurement. Ring gap of 021. That's the largest ring gap, largest measurement on my bore that I've got. Now the pistons measure out in between 070 and 071. Which, you know, this is what it's supposed to be what they're all supposed to measure out to, which is 20 over. Stock bore is 4055. 20 over would be 4075, which gives me a ring gap of, 020. And if I do my measurements and measure out the bore size for my top ring, it wants to be about 019, to 020. So, the 016 measurement, the 015 measurement, pretty tight. I would have to grind that gap out a little bit more. The problem is, though, is the piston skirt. It's only leaving me about 1,000th or 2,000ths clearance on that side, and I'm kind of worried about it. So for instance, if I grab a piston and let's go over here to the big side. Okay, here's the one that measures out at 4075. Okay, got a little bit of room to breathe. I can just kind of shake it around in there a little bit. Okay, and then a little bit tighter over here. Still goes in. Okay, now over here where it measures out 072. I have to kind of actually work it to get it in there, very tight. No play. No play. This one here, ooh, see, that almost didn't even want to go in. So, I'll slowly lay this in here, put that right on that lip, and then come over here. Look at that, I can't even get it to come past. It's actually stuck right there, I swear, it's stuck. Won't come out. Now that just scraped across there. To get that out. So shit, I don't know what to say about that, man. That would mean I have to take everything back apart. I have to take the block back in. I have to take all this back apart. New seal. Technically new bolts for the mains. Oh man. Oh man, oh man. Well, having too much fun. There it is, all tore back apart again, and kind of cleaned up. Got rid of all the silicone from all the sealer that I put on there. Cleaned up all my bolts again. So Back to the machine shop.